Good morning. We're back on our hillside. Thumbnails from the Sermon on the Mount. I've got a bell here, and this bell is a very distinctive note and sound. The bell that was used at the end of my Sunday school lesson. When it was rung, it was the end of Sunday school. Distinctive in its note and sound. This is the very bell. Jesus was the master illustrator. Do you know, in the Sermon on the Mount, he takes ordinary things, as he did in a lot of his teaching, things like the ordinary things of life, like seed and fishing and farming and trees. And Jesus takes two very common things here. He takes salt and light. Now, the context, of course, is the Beatitudes that Stephen spoke on yesterday. You know, it's talking about happiness many times over, God, blessed by God. If you like, the essential character of a Christian. Blessed are those who are poor in spirit, who mourn, who are humble, who are meek, who hunger and thirst for righteousness. When you start from that basis and live out your life, Jesus is saying, you are the salt of the earth and the light of the world. The closest context, of course, for these words of Jesus is the last of those Beatitudes. Blessed are those when you are persecuted for doing right, when you start to live this life. And as you live it, you live in conflict or in counterculture to the world around you. So Jesus says, there are two images to encourage you as Christians to leave your stamp or your imprint. One is salt. Now, salt's important to us, isn't it? It brings taste. I mean, who would eat chips without salt on it? But in the East, they used it far, far more. The Greeks, for example, believed that salt was divine. We have an expression, don't we? Sometimes we use he or she as the salt of the earth, and we talk about someone's value. But to those time, the whiteness spoke of purity, and the Romans used it as a pure offering to their gods. So is Jesus saying, in effect, in a world of lowered standards, you're to be people of honesty, integrity and purity? Maybe. Maybe he's also talking about flavour, because that's what we mainly use salt for today, isn't it? For flavour. Otherwise something is insipid or tasteless. Christians are often accused, of course, of the opposite, that we take flavour out of life. That is really sad when the one who called us to be salt and light says, I've come that you may have life, and life in all its fullness and abundance, richness. Can I even say life with all its taste? I think it's important for us to discover and rediscover the lost radiance of Christian faith. Let's add flavour into the life of people in the world around us. Salt was also an antiseptic. I mean, you get it in your cat, it stings, doesn't it? Salt penetrates in a world that is needing, in many cases, looking for the church to be the church, to bring alive these Beatitudes of Christ, hunger and thirst for righteousness and being peacemakers, penetrated deep into areas of society where we can bring healing. But most importantly, I think salt in those days was used as a preservative to stop things going bad, to hold putrefaction at bay. Your presence, says Jesus, defeats corruption and makes it easier for others to live good lives. Barry Maguire, a Christian singer, once said this: the church are called to be the shock absorbers in this world. The shock absorbers in this world. Implicitly, I think Jesus is saying, without a disciple, without you as disciples, this world will turn even more rotten. The Christians should have the effect of delaying moral and spiritual putrefaction. Something more that Jesus says. He says, what good is salt if it loses its flavour? When it becomes tasteless, or when it loses its effect to stop corruption, it's useless to be thrown out on the streets. The streets in those days was the garbage dump of the ancient East. It was trampled underfoot. Paul, writing a number of years later, a group of Christians in Rome, says this: do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Don't let this world squeeze you into its mould. Don't lose your saltiness. Don't lose your raison d'etre. Don't lose your purpose for living. Don't lose your distinctive. Get out of the salt shaker. That's the hard bit, isn't it? How do we get out of the salt shaker? Get rubbed out into society to make a difference. Keep being salty. Keep being distinctive. Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth. You only. You're the light of the world. Light. Now, by implication, Jesus is saying this world is dark. It's a world that is shrouded in darkness. You pick up the newspaper, you watch the news, you see stories of genocide, mass graves, serial killers. Think about the program on Dares that was on recently on the television. Abuse, war, sex trade. Greed, backbiting, gossip, slander, that's getting a bit close to the heart. Because we begin to discover there's darkness in our own hearts too. The message of Jesus is called the gospel, or the good news. The good news that Jesus, the light, has come into this world of darkness to overcome the darkness of my soul. And by the way, it's good news, not good advice. It's good advice too, but it's ultimately good news. The news that Jesus comes into our darkness to dispel and overcome it. That on the cross, he takes all the horror of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the killing fields of Cambodia and Rwanda, all my greed and my lust and my impurity and my pride. Light of the world, says a song, by darkness slain, then bursting forth. In glorious day, up from the grave, he rose again. Jesus is the light of the world, who has come to deal with my darkness, to guide me, to warn us, to help us see. Now it becomes you. Jesus, the light of the world. Now he says, you're the light of the world. That's a great compliment, isn't it? I mean, we don't produce light like Jesus. We reflect light as the moon reflects the light of the sun. And Jesus says, you're the light of the world, like a city set on a hill, that shines its light. It can't be hidden. Our world is full of lights. And in so many ways, we take it for granted, isn't it? Street lights. Can't find many places without light pollution. Imagine a world where there's no light. Many years ago, I trekking in Nepal just to see a light on the top of a hill. You could see it for miles with the clouds reflecting that light. It makes the night less dark and more bearable. Jesus says, light not on a hill, but also on a lampstand. Houses at that time were very dark, only an 18-inch round hole, and the lamp was like a gravy jug with oil with a wick floating in it. And it stood on a lamp branch, the roughly shape of a branch of wood. And when you went out, you would take the lamp, take it off the branch, and you cover it over with a bushel, an earthen measuring jug. And it would burn without risk, because you didn't want to go out, because you didn't have any matches. Jesus is saying, I want you to be on that branch. I want you to be seen. I want you to be saying the way you treat that shop assistant, the way you order that meal, the way you treat your wife, your children, your colleagues, your employers. Lights to see things, lights to guide as well. Bring example, says Jesus. Now you and I are going to be the first to support the weak, the first to be there for the homeless. Christians throughout history have changed the world and been light, prison reform, medical cures, abolition of slavery, abolition of child labour, orphanages, reform of prisons, control of alcohol, fairness for employers, for employees and workers, dealing fairly and righteously with asylum seekers. Jesus says in verse 16, in the same way let your good deeds shine, for all to see, and everyone will praise your Father in heaven. The word there, good, means good deeds, beautiful, attractive, winsome, pointing and drawing attention to God. A flickering wick sometimes we may feel. It seems so small, but the alternative is utter blackness. My bell. Auntie Beattie was my Sunday school teacher. She was a single mum, and she worked as a cook in our local school, and she went into that school as a cook, and at first it was the teasing of about her faith, and then increasing nastiness and persecution, really. She just sought to be salt and light there. One woman watched. It took many years, but Viv trusted Jesus. Auntie Beattie was salt and light. She rang a distinctive note, the note of Christ. Am I? Are you? May God help us today. God go with you.